everybody, and welcome back to the podcast. I hope that everybody is doing good. If anybody is watching this on YouTube, then I just comment on my funny crazy light situation I've got going on. You obviously can't see this if you're listening to it on just a normal podcast platform, but it's very sunny here today, which is I'm not complaining about, but we've got roof lanterns and I can't block the sun out of them. So I've got a little bit of a halo over my head at the moment. And also just a reminder, I do put most of the episodes on YouTube now as well. I used to do it like 4 years ago, and it just was so much work, but now technology it's just come along so far that now it is like minimal work to just upload the episodes to YouTube. So I put them on there as well if you want to ever watch them and just have a little bit of a visual. Obviously it's just me and a guest kind of chatting away, but if you wanted to watch that, I know some people do enjoy watching podcasts on there, so we are over there as well. Also, just a reminder of all of the support that I can give: hypnobirthing classes, doula support, there's my book, I do power hours, and also I have a Patreon page as well where you can get a little bit of extra support, and I'll leave links for those things in the show notes. Today I'm going to talk to you about something that can feel quite unexpected and also sometimes a little bit worrying if it comes up in labour, but actually it's something that is quite normal, and that is meconium. And I've been at births in my capacity as a doula before where meconium has been present, and I feel like it always feels like one of those things that's a bit of a shock, even though it's relatively common. And I think it's always worth preparing for what you may do if meconium is present during your labour, and having a think about your options beforehand so that if it does happen, maybe it might still feel like a shock, but you kind of already know roughly what your plan would be. So you might be labouring, really, really well, feeling totally in your flow, and then suddenly someone says that there's meconium in the waters, and obviously, understandably, everything can shift. The room could suddenly feel different, and there may be more people present. You may be told that you need extra monitoring, and suddenly you can find yourself obviously worrying about whether baby's okay, whether something has gone wrong, or whether you need to change your plan. So in today's episode, I want to take you through this step by step so that you understand what meconium actually is, why it happens, why it can be present, what the real risks are with proper context behind them, because that's always really important, and what your options are within UK maternity care. As always, with the things I talk about on here, it's about replacing fear with understanding. So obviously these things do sometimes happen, sometimes things crop up, but understanding them goes a really long way in reducing some of that fear around them. So meconium, for anybody that doesn't know what meconium is your baby's first bowel movement, but it's really helpful to understand a little bit more of what it actually consists of. So it begins forming during pregnancy, and it's basically made up of cells your baby has shed from their skin, fine hair, mucus, amniotic fluid that your baby has swallowed, and bile from their digestive system. So it's essentially a collection of everything your baby has processed while growing in the womb. It has a very distinctive appearance. Meconium is usually dark green to almost black, thick and sticky with a tar-like consistency. So no matter whether you have meconium present during your actual labour, you will come across it at some point, because your baby at some point will pass the meconium. So in most cases, babies pass meconium after birth, often within the first 24 hours. However, sometimes it is passed during or before labour. So when that happens, the meconium mixes with the amniotic fluid, and the waters can then appear green, brown or yellowish. And this is what they often refer to as meconium stained amniotic fluid. So it's a mix of the amniotic fluid that you have, and also then the meconium, making it a kind of lighter greenish type consistency. One of the most important things to understand is that meconium is actually relatively common. Around 12 to 20% of labours involve meconium stained fluid. So that's roughly 1 in 5 births. When something happens during labour, it can feel rare and alarming, but in reality, it is something that many people do experience. So if you were in a room, for example, with 10 pregnant women, 1 or 2 of you might experience this. So when something is explained in clinical language, it can sometimes feel like something's gone wrong. But when we understand how common it is, it becomes clear that it is often part of normal variation and therefore can help make us feel perhaps a little bit more comfortable with it. So it's really important to know that most babies in these situations are born healthy, they breathe normally and require no intervention at all. There is often a misunderstanding about why babies pass meconium. So you might hear that it means the baby is distressed, but while that can be a reason, it is only one possible explanation and not actually the main one. As babies approach full term, their digestive system matures and their bowel muscles begin working more effectively. So passing meconium can simply be a sign that your baby is physiologically ready for life outside of the womb. Meconium also becomes more likely the further along you are in pregnancy. So it is more common after 40 weeks and even more so after 41 or 42 weeks. And this is because the digestive system is more active and the baby has had longer to build up the meconium. Labour itself is also an intense physiological process. So during labour, there can be pressure on the baby. There can be temporary cord compression and hormonal surges as well. And these things can stimulate the baby's vagus nerve, which can trigger a bowel movement. And in many cases, this is completely normal and not harmful. In some situations, meconium can be linked to reduced oxygen levels and fetal stress, but this is less common. It's important to keep the balance here. So not all babies with meconium are distressed and not all distressed babies pass meconium. Meconium is not a diagnosis. It is simply a signal that invites a closer look. So when we talk about risks, it's helpful to go slowly and keep everything in context. So even though meconium occurs in up to 20% of births, the majority of babies are born well, they cry immediately, and they need no extra help. The main complication that is usually discussed is meconium aspiration syndrome, or as it's often known as MAS. This occurs when a baby inhales meconium-stained fluid into their lungs, either before birth or with their first breaths. When meconium enters the lungs, it can irritate the airways, block airflow, and interfere with oxygen exchange. However, it's important to understand how often this actually happens. Around 3 to 12% of babies exposed to meconium will develop MAS, which means that most babies do not. So if a baby does develop MAS, they may need oxygen support, closer monitoring, and occasionally care in a neonatal unit. The reassuring news is that most babies with MAS recover fully, and severe cases are relatively rare. The level of risk can increase when meconium is combined with other factors. So thick meconium, which is darker and more concentrated, can indicate a larger amount and is more likely to affect breathing. An abnormal heart rate may suggest that the baby is not coping as well. Post-term pregnancy increases the likelihood of meconium, and signs of infection or other issues can add to the overall picture. The key takeaway here is that meconium on its own is usually not the problem. It is meconium alongside other concerns that changes how the situation is viewed. So in UK maternity care, when meconium is noticed, the first step is assessment. So your midwife will consider the colour of the fluid, whether it is light or thick, your baby's heart rate, how far along you are in your pregnancy, and whether there are any other risk factors. Light meconium tends to be more diluted and yellow or green in colour and is generally associated with lower risk. Thick meconium is darker, often described as having a pea soup consistency, and is more likely to raise concern. You may be offered different types of monitoring. Intermittent monitoring involves listening to your baby's heart rate at intervals and allows for more freedom of movement. Continuous monitoring, often called CTG, tracks your baby's heart rate continuously. There are trade-offs to consider, as with everything when it comes to birth. Continuous monitoring can provide ongoing reassurance and detect changes quickly, but it can also limit movement, potentially affect the flow of labour and increase the likelihood of further intervention. Sometimes additional support is arranged for the birth, such as having a practitioner skilled in newborn resuscitation present. This is a precaution rather than an indication that something is definitely wrong, so please do just bear that in mind. When it comes to your options, this is where your autonomy really matters. If the meconium is light and your baby's heart rate is normal, you may choose to continue as planned. This could mean staying at home if you are already there, or continuing with a birth centre plan without additional intervention. You might choose continuous monitoring if you would like more reassurance or more information about how your baby is coping during labour. If you're planning a home or birth centre birth, you may be advised to transfer to obstetric care, particularly if additional risk factors are present. If concerns increase during labour, there may be discussions about interventions such as induction or augmentation of labour, assisted birth using forceps or ventouse, or caesarean birth. It's important to remember that these are not automatic steps. They're options that are considered based on how things are evolving. Meconium, quite understandably, can trigger fear, as it is often linked to the idea of distress. It can change how your care is managed and it introduces a level of uncertainty. However, when we bring in context and understanding, it becomes hopefully something that can be approached a little bit more calmly. If meconium is mentioned during your labour, you can pause and ask questions. You might ask whether it is thick or light, whether your baby's heart rate is normal, and what your options are in that moment. Most importantly, as always, you still have a voice in your care. So today we have touched the very, very surface in exploring meconium, and I've talked about how meconium is common and often a normal variation, that it has multiple causes and is not solely a sign of distress, that the main complication is relatively rare, and that decisions should always involve you still. So please don't go away fearing this. Understanding it is what allows you to stay calm and to stay grounded and to make the decisions that ultimately feel right for you. As always, there's no right or wrong decision. It's just what you feel comfortable doing. If this episode has helped you to feel more informed and reassured, then please do share it with someone that you feel might need it. And please do rate, review, subscribe to the podcast as well. And I will see you in the next episode.